All right, guys. Really important lesson today, especially if you're concerned with things like stupid, silly, insignificant things like your grades. We got to start learning how to write essays, and we have to start writing them fairly frequently. We'll start writing essays once every couple of weeks. And I was waiting for everybody to come back to class or as many kids as possible to do this for lots of different reasons. But it's time that we start to learn how to do this. So there's two types of essays in this class that we have to learn. We're going to learn the first type now, and we'll worry about the second type later on in this class. The first one we're going to do is called the long essay question. Now, long essay is a comparative term compared to an SAQ, which is very, very, very brief. LEQs are typically a couple pages, typically 3 to 5 paragraphs. And it really kind of separates who knows AP World History and doesn't. And it also gives you an opportunity to show what you know in a little bit better way than an SAQ or even a multiple choice will do. So I'm going to show you how to write these essays. I'm going to give you some examples of some stuff. I'm going to go over the rubric with you today, and we are going to start practicing how to do these at the end of this class. If you have any questions, immediately as the question comes up, put it into the chat. And at the end of the video, I will go through all the questions in the chat and I'll try to answer them. Now, a couple things just to give you just some background. This is my 15th year teaching AP World History. I've taught this class almost exclusively for 15 years. For the last 10 years, I've worked for College Board and ETS, scoring AP essays for them. So when you take this test at the end of the year, I'm one of the people that they hire to actually go grade the essays for them. And not only am I a scorer, I'm what's now called a table leader, which means I have other people who, for lack of a better term, I'm in charge of, or I'm responsible for, and I have to teach them how to grade the essays, and I have to make sure they're doing a good job. This is so I've had a lot of experience grading and scoring essays for College Board. And one of the things you'll find out in this class is I'm an exceptionally fast grader. I'm really, really, really fast, but I'm really, really, really accurate. I can give very, very, very accurate scores in these essays really quickly. The combination of my experience and how fast I read, I've been told several years I'm the fastest reader out of the 2,000 people who go and read essays. The combination of those things is I've probably read more AP World History essays and seen more AP World History essays, both in class and in the summer, than possibly anybody else in America. At the very least, I'm on the short list of people who've read the most essays in the world. That's not to be a brag. It's to say I'm experienced, and I know what works, and I know what scores well, and I know what scores poorly. And long story short, I'm going to teach you the simplest, easiest method I can for how to write these essays, and just go with it. If you look online or if you look on YouTube, there's other ways of doing these essays. There's other ways of skinning this cat. I'm trying to teach you what I've seen based on 15 years of experience now of being the most straightforward, easy to do way to do this. And if you'll write these essays in the framework that I show you, and then put a lot of good history in there, you're going to do very, very well on these essays because you're good writers. Many of you are in AP Lang already, and you're Columbus High School students, which means, at least in theory, you're supposed to be smarter than the average bear. So all of that lead up is to say, let's start talking about this essay. So obviously you're going to get a prompt and you're going to get a time period. Most of the time, the time period of the prompt is very similar to the time period of one of our 4 time periods in this class. So here is an example of a prompt. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which the decline of states led to cultural or social changes from 1200 to 1450. Now, you're going to see lots of questions in this class that have the language, analyze the extent of. And the three things you're going to see the most is analyze the extent of change, analyze the extent of similarity, or analyze the extent of the effects. Now, here's the little trick about this. If you have a question like this one that says analyze the extent of change, and you say nothing changes, something does not change in this place, have you analyzed the extent of change? And the answer to that question is yes. If you say it doesn't change, you've analyzed the extent of change. If you say, if for a question that says analyze the extent of similarity, and you say they're not similar at all, they're very, very different, that's analyzing the extent of change, okay? So in this class, we have pairs of what we call historical thinking skills: change and continuity, similarity and difference, and cause and effect. And the first thing you do when you look at one of these questions is you ask yourself, is this a analyze the extent of change question, an analyze the extent of cause question, or an analyze the extent of similarity or difference question? And this one's obviously analyze the extent of change. The only things that score on this essay are the things related to the prompt. You have to stay on prompt. This essay is about states that are in decline from 1200 to 1450 and the cultural or social changes that do or do not take place as a result of states declining. So in this essay, you have to know states that decline in this time period and the cultural or social changes that are associated with it. If you know the information, the essay becomes very, very easy, okay? So first question we have to ask ourselves is, what are the states in this time period that we know are in decline? Well, the states that I have given you in this class that are in decline, we said are, so this is the plan phase, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. First question is, what are the examples of states that are declining, and then what are the changes culturally or socially that are taking place? So this is the question you'd have to ask yourself if you're getting ready to answer this question as you're right before you write it. So take a little time and plan this out. So the first question is, what are examples of states that are declining in this period? I've given you 3 states that declined in this period. And again, you need to know the difference between a state and a region. You can't say China, Middle East. You have to name the actual states. So we talked about the Song Dynasty. Can you remember what happened to the Song Dynasty? The Song were one of the examples of an empire in this time period that was conquered by the Mongols and destroyed by the Mongols. Same thing for the Abbasids. The Abbasids were an empire in the Middle East, and they get conquered and destroyed by the Mongols. So that definitely fits the definition of declining states. And then the big Mongol Empire, we said by the end of the period, had broken into smaller Mongol empires called Khanates. So the big Mongol Empire is also an empire that you can argue is in decline because it breaks up ultimately into smaller empires. So those are 3 examples of declining states in this time period that you could write about. Now, then the next part of the question was, well, what are cultural and social changes? Well, in all 3 of these places, a social continuity, something that did not change. So if you wrote about this, you get credit because continuity is evaluating the extent of change, but saying it didn't change at all is patriarchy. In all these places, you still have men ruling political systems and men ruling households. That is a social continuity, male-dominated societies, and it happens in all 3 of these places. And it happens in the places where these states are at, even after these states collapse. So when these states collapse, it didn't change patriarchy. An example of change. In one of these places, you're going to see widespread new religions introduced into China after the collapse of the Song. We said the Mongols spread Buddhism. Muslims are more in China during the Mongol period, and even Christians than they were previously. Religion is culture. Now, I'm not writing about all the declining empires when I make this statement. All I have to make is true statements about at least one declining empire. So if I wrote a paragraph about patriarchy, I could pull from all three of those empires to show everything I know about, hey, patriarchy still exists. But in this one, this isn't true for the area that the Abbasids control or the whole Mongol Empire, but it is true for China. So because it's true for China, if I just present it as one place where there's a change as new religions are spread in China after the collapse of the Song, that works. In the Middle East, a continuity is after the collapse of the Abbasids. Islam stays the main culture. That's a continuity, and that's evaluating the extent of change. In China, Confucianism is still practiced. So that would be a continuity in China, even after the Song dynasty collapses, and a change would be the spread of Buddhism in China. So the point here is there's both changes and continuities, and it's up to you to give me some examples of each. Now, after you've done your planning, you're like, okay, here are the empires I'm going to write about, or the states I'm going to write about, and here are the cultures and societies, and here's the culture and social changes I'm going to write about. You can start to write the essay. Now, first thing you have to do, first point we're going to try to get, and by the way, this is going to have a 6-point rubric. We're going to talk about that as we continue in this, is context. Context needs to be in the opening paragraph. You may see other people saying there's another place where context can be. I understand why they're saying that, and I also have a really good reason for saying put your context in the opening paragraph. Trust me on this, okay? Especially as we're teaching this class in sequential order. Much later on, I will give you the green light to put context in a second place as well, but you're not ready for that. Right now, context needs to be in the opening paragraph. Now, what you need to do to get the context point is in your opener, you need to set the relevant historical background to frame a response to the prompts. The question is about empires that are collapsing and the changes that take place. So my context needs to be related to why are these empires collapsing, or what was the culture and social systems that were in place before they collapse, so I can have the background to understand the rest of the essay you're trying to write. The context can be exclusively from information inside the time period, or it can be information from the time period before this unit. As we get later into this class and as we cover more units, oftentimes people like to include stuff that happened previously in the previous unit as the context for what's happening in the unit we're covering now and those questions, and that can be really effective. So both ways, but the information you write about has to effectively set the background and explain what's going on in the world, and for this question, in these world regions, to understand the arguments that you're going to make. You must include specific information in your context. One of the big problems with the context is it tends to be very vague. People don't put enough real information into it. So you've got to give really specific and as much depth as you can. And this is part of your opening paragraph. It is not the entirety of your opening paragraph. So here's an example. By 1200, the Song dynasty and Abbasid caliphates had ruled China in the Middle East for hundreds of years. So the question didn't say what empires decline. So as part of my context, I'm introducing, hey, here are 2 empires that are going to decline. And they have native religious beliefs. Remember, religion is culture. Native religious practices like Islam and Confucianism shaped every element of society, from family organization to government policies. So I'm saying, here's 2 examples of empires. Here's some cultures that existed before they declined, Confucianism and Islam. However, like many other states, both empires fell to Mongol conquest. And I explained why did these empires collapse. That's a good example of context that would have worked. Now, there's other ways you could have done context. We're not going to go into all the different ways you could skin the cat. This was one example of an opening that would have worked. So after you've written the context, the next thing you need to do, you need to write your thesis. Context is 1 point, thesis is 1 point, and thesis also needs to be in your opening paragraph. In a perfect world, the first part of your opening paragraph would be your context, and the end of your paragraph, your context would end going right into your thesis. Now, your thesis can be multiple sentences. It doesn't have to be one. Also, but I should say this, if it's multiple sentences, the sentences have to be continuous, which means they have to be back to back to back. I can't start my opening paragraph with part of a thesis, do context, and then finish with more thesis. It all has to be in one continuous thought. Ideally, that is in the end of your opening paragraph after your context is ended. The only thing that should be in your opening paragraph is context and thesis, because those are the only things that score points. This is not like an English paper. In an English paper, you're going to start an essay off with some sort of clever hook to get the audience's attention. We're not doing that. I like to say the difference between writing in a history class and writing in AP Lang is in AP Lang, you're starting off at a swimming pool and you're at the zero entry part of the swimming pool. And you're going to start by slowly walking into the pool. You're going to get your toes wet. And you're going to slowly go a little bit deeper and get your shins and then your knees and then your waist. And it takes you time to get into the deep end of the pool with an English essay. These essays, we are cannonballing. We are jumping right in. These essays are not about your technical ability as a writer. You're either doing things to score points, which in the opening paragraph means context and thesis, or you're just wasting the reader's time. So don't do that. Plus, speaking of wasting time, you only got 40 minutes to write this essay, so you got to go. You can't afford to waste time on stuff like this. All right. I suggest having a two-part thesis. All you have to do to have the thesis is have one part that works. But what you're going to try to do in this paper is have two parts of a historical thinking skill. So this question was about change, about the extent of change. So in this essay, you want to talk about what changed and what stayed the same. That should be in my thesis. If I write a two-part thesis and only one of my two parts works, you're going to get the thesis point. If you write a one-part thesis and that one part doesn't work, you're not going to get the thesis. So one of the things about these essays is they are scored by a points added system. You start off with a 0. And then once you do something to earn a point, that point is yours forever and ever and ever. So if you have a 22-part thesis and 21 of the parts are wrong, we don't punish you for the stuff that's wrong. All that happens on these essays is you get credit for the stuff that is right. And once you get a point, that point is yours for the rest of the essay. So one of the things we say in this class is when in doubt, write it out. If you're not sure that something is true, put it into your essay because it might get you a point, but it certainly can't hurt you. It can't take a point away. So if you were on the fence about if you should put something in an essay and you put it in, you're going to get a point. And if you don't put it in, you're still not going to get the point and nothing's going to change. I have some funny stories about this. One of my stories, well, I'm not going to tell that story. I'm not going to put that story on a video. Let's just say this. In an essay, you can literally write pages and pages of things that are wrong. As long as you write stuff that's right, you can get some points, okay? So this right here are 4 examples of a student who attempted to write a thesis. I want you to tell me if any of these worked or not. I'm going to sit here awkwardly for like 60 seconds. And I want you to put into the chat And we'll just number these 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which one of these do you think is a thesis? And which one of these do you think are not a thesis? Actually, I'll give you 2 minutes. This is your daily grade for the day. I want to see who can figure out which one of these is a thesis and which one is not. So 2 minutes. I'm going to sit here awkwardly while you put this into the chat. Go. You have 1 minute. $15 seconds. Which ones are theses and which ones are not? And time. All right, so let's talk about each one of these individually. One of these is a thesis, and 3 of these are failed attempts. So let's talk about which ones are and which ones are not. First one, there are many things that changed and stayed the same culturally and in society from 1200 to 1450 in many states. That, my friends, is ugly. Probably 83.7% of all the theses that I grade that do not get the thesis point are some version of this crud. This person did not do anything but rewrite the question. They don't say anything about what states are declining and how does their culture changes. That's what has to be in the thesis for this particular prompt. This is nothing. This, as the French would say, is garbage. Let's look at the second example. After the Abbassids were conquered by the Mongols, they then continued to have abundant Silk Road trade. Does this talk about a declining empire? Yes, it talks about the Abbassids. Does it talk about continuity? Yes, it says they still have Silk Road trade, but it's not a thesis. And the reason it's not a thesis is this question is not about economics and trade. This question is about culture and society. This person got off of the prompt, so even though every word this person said was true historically, since they don't tell a cultural or societal change or continuity, they do not get the thesis point. Third one, in China after the collapse of the Song dynasty, patriarchy was weakened, and many women began to serve in important government jobs. Well, they name a dynasty, Song. They name a change. They say patriarchy was weakened, but this also is not a thesis because it's not true. Patriarchy doesn't end. Women do not get all of a sudden start to work in government jobs after the Song dynasty collapses. This is another example of not having a thesis. And then you're like, wait a minute, Quattro. You said there was one thesis. You're telling me that crud at the end, which is no grammar, misspelling, that's a thesis? Yes. Because, like I told you, This is not about technical writing. If you misspell a word, it's okay. If you don't use the proper punctuation, we look past it. We understand that we just want this to be about your knowledge of history and not how good of a writer you are. But the thing that the person said when the song ended, Confucianism kept impacting family organization and hierarchy, that's true. And they talk about an empire, the song, and they say something about society, family organization continues. It kept impacting. That's a statement of something continuing. That's a true statement evaluating the extent of change, saying it's not changing, it still continues. And while it's ugly, and while it's only one part, and I want you to do a two-part thesis, I'd have to give the thesis point. I give all sorts of points for ugly theses over the course of the last 15 years. And don't think just because you're a good technical writer that you're going to be great at these essays, because it's all about the history. And don't think because you're a lousy technical writer that you're going to suck at these essays, because it's all about the history. So here's an example of what I would like to think is an awesome thesis. Two parts. After the Song and Absent empires were destroyed by the Mongols, native religions like Islam and Confucianism continue to be widely practiced. However, under policies of Mongol tolerance, foreign religions like Buddhism and Islam will spread into China more than in previous eras. So I gave one thing that was a continuity, and I gave one thing that was a change. And those make a good thesis. And everything that's in this thesis is going to be the big ideas of the essay that I write. Now, you could write about totally different cultures and societies. And here's another thing that's cool about these essays. I taught you these three empires in decline. These are not the only empires in decline in this time period. Another teacher might have taught their students about some other, they could have taught them about the Byzantines, which you don't know a darn thing about. And that's okay, because we're just teaching case studies. As long as I give you some examples, you've got enough to write an essay about, okay? It doesn't matter what three examples I've given you. I've given you enough. You can write this essay. Now, you could make this whole essay just about one empire in decline. There's enough in just the song that you don't have to use absent stuff. Or you could do like what this person is going to do in this essay and talk about some of the things in the song and some of the things in the episode. And you could even talk about some of the things in the Mongol Empire that happened after they declined, as long as you relate to the prompt, which is when empires go into decline, what social and cultural things change and stay the same. So if I combine my opening paragraph and I combine my context, in theory, I have a very, very nice opening. Sorry, if I combine my thesis and my context, in theory, I have a very nice opening paragraph. And this would be a good example of one. This would be an opening paragraph that 100 people who scored this essay, who've had any sort of training at all, would say, yep, this gets 2 points. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Quattro, you spent a whole lot of time on the first paragraph. You're right, I have. But here's the catch. This is a 6-point essay. 2 of the 6 points are just doing this thing. If you can write an opening paragraph, you've got 2 of your 6 points. And here's a dirty little secret. The last time that we had an essay, an LEQ, which was 2 years ago because we had a wonky COVID-related stuff happen last year, the national average on the LEQ was a 2.2. If you could just write a good opening paragraph, you'd be almost average, and if you didn't turn anything else in. If you can get these 2 points in the opening paragraph, the rest of your essay will write itself. And there's no reason you shouldn't make a 5. And a lot of you could even make a 6, which is the highest score you can make. So we've written our opening paragraph. Let's talk about what goes next. You're going to write 3 body paragraphs. Each body paragraph should start off with a topic sentence that argues for a specific cultural or societal change. And I keep saying cultural societal change because that's what was in this question. If the question was economics, you have to write about economics. So if the question was about economic similarities and differences between growing states, I'd have to talk about states that are growing, and I have to talk about economically how they're similar and how they're different. Okay, so you got to fill in the spaces based on different questions. But since this question is about change in society and culture, that's what this essay has to be about. The rest of the paragraphs are about supporting the topic sentence. So each body paragraph should have a topic sentence that is one of your main ideas. And ideally, it's the main idea you saw in your thesis, at least 2 of them. So these are the 3 main ideas that I put in my thesis and I'm going to write about in my essay. So I'll have 3 body paragraphs. After the collapse of the Abbasid, Islam remains the dominant cultural force in the Middle East. That will be 1 paragraph that I now am going to support with rich evidence. I'm going to support this statement with history to back what happens here. Then another paragraph. After the collapse of the Song, Confucianism remains the dominant cultural force in Islam. I'm going to write about how Confucianism is still widely practiced even after the Mongols conquered the Song. And then the third paragraph is going to be after the collapse of the Song, a major change is the spread of Islam and Buddhism under Mongol rule. So then I'm going to talk about how those changes. So I'm going to write about 2 things that don't change and 1 thing that does. That's what this essay will be. It could be 2 things that change and 1 thing that doesn't. But it is important to have both sides, because one of our points is going to be complexity. And one of the ways that you show complexity is you show change and continuity in your essay, or similarity and difference, or cause and effect. This is an example of a sample body paragraph. After the collapse of the Song, Confucianism remains the dominant cultural force in China. Chinese families were still extremely patriarchal. Now, let's talk about things that are going to be evidence. When I say patriarchy, that's evidence, with men ruling families and societies as part of the Confucianist ideal. Government leaders were trained in the teaching of Confucianism and the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is going to be evidence of what we're saying. It was filled with Confucianist-trained scholars. Even ideas like the mandate of heaven persisted, with Mongol rulers adopting traditional clothing of Chinese emperors and claiming the mandate. So I made a statement and I backed it up with real evidence to show Confucianism does not change even after the Mongols captured it. You need 3 paragraphs like this. Now, what you don't need is a conclusion. So, opening paragraph, big ideas. So I said there were 6 points on this rubric. Let me finish with what are the other points. So, making an argument that uses the correct historical thinking skill is 1 point. If in the body of your essay you write a paragraph that makes a historical argument that works, that's a response to the question, which in this question, again, is either change continuity, and it can be a restatement of part of your thesis as long as you back it up with good information, that's 1 point. If you have detailed evidence to support the argument, you get between 1 point and 2 points. In this class, to get both points, you're going to have evidence that supports both sides of historical thinking skills, and you're going to have rich evidence. I get to decide what consists of rich evidence and what does not. Minimally, you have to have 5 good pieces of evidence total, and at least one of them has to support both sides of historical thinking skills. So in this essay, it could be 4 for change, 1 for continuity, or 4 for continuity and 1 for change. But you got to have at least 1 of both. And then complexity. Complexity is showing both sides of historical thinking skill in lots of depth with abundant evidence. This is the hardest point to get. You're never allowed to come back to me if you have a 5 and ask the quattro, why didn't I make a 6? 6s are like 99.9999999% of students do not get a 6. A 6 is you blew the doors off of this essay. Oh my gosh, you knew a lot of history, you wrote it right, and you put a ton of great evidence in. A 5 is a great score. Don't ever complain about a 5. A 6 is me saying, oh my gosh, that was some life-changing stuff right there. And I am so glad that I was able to be blessed to have you as a student. during the entire course of this year, I might give 10 sixes on an LEQ. And by the time we're done, I'll probably have graded about 2,000 of these things. So shoot for the moon. Let that be your goal. I'm going to be I'm going to get one of the sixes this year. But understand a 5's a really great score. Kids always ask me, DeQuattro, what does my score equate to on the AP exam? A really good rule of thumb, and this is a rough rule of thumb, but it's a good rule of thumb. If you make whatever you make on the LEQ, that's what you would be on pace to make if you were taking the AP exam. So if you made a 5 or a 6, that's on pace to make a 5. If you made a 4, you're on pace for a 4. A 3, you're on pace for a 3. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's a very simple and basically correct way of saying this is where you're at on this one LEQ. Now on the actual exam, just big picture, they're going to give you 3 LEQs, and you get to from 3 different periods, and you get to choose one of them. So you get to choose your LEQ that you write about. But that's something we'll talk about as we get later on in this class as well. So that was my last slide. If you have questions, now's the time. Put them into the chat so everybody can see them, and I'll just start banging out answers one by one. We're going to do a writing activity in class at the end of this, and going forward, we're going to start writing a lot. So you need to get this idea of how to write an LEQ right now, because it's a really, really big deal. All right, y'all have a great day, and let's do this.